new to the board. I started with the board in January. Uh, Newly diagnosed as ALK positive about a year and a half. And I, like many of you, have many of the challenges moving forward, but I'm glad to say that I am living a full life today. Um, some housekeeping notes. Today's session is going to be recorded, and we'll share the replay afterwards for those of you who want to revisit the discussion. And it'll be on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sending it out by email as well. We ask everyone to please stay muted during the presentations, avoid any background noise so it's smooth for everyone. Feel free to turn your camera on and off during the session if you feel more comfortable. And we have collected, obviously, numerous questions for Jeff to address throughout his presentation. If in the meantime you have other questions, please send them through the chat, and we will try and get them addressed near the end. So I'd like to start our great presentation with our guest, Dr. Jeffrey Liu. Jeff is a medical oncologist at Princess Margaret Cancer Center, focusing on ALK cancer. He has opened 19 ALK and 6 ROS1 clinical trials at Princess Margaret Cancer Center and brings a wealth of expertise to all of us. Today he's going to share his expertise on treatments, side effect management, research, and a whole lot more. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for actually having me. Today, I actually, like in previous sessions, I've done kind of a formal set of slides and to go over updates and so forth. I didn't do that today because I thought the most important thing was to answer your questions, and to go over anything that was particularly new. Um, and I think that at this point, some of the new things that are coming up include the following. One, the CROWN trial data for first-line lorlatinib, 7-year data will be coming out in slightly more than a month from now. I am embargoed. In other words, I'm not allowed to say anything about this, except you just have to look at my expression. Okay. And the fact that there's likelihood, there's like a very high likelihood that there will need to be a 9-year follow-up, to give you a hint as to what the results are showing right now. So I think that's, especially putting on YouTube, that's all I can say. The second thing is the fact that Nuvalent 655, which is otherwise known as neladalkib, another tongue twister of a name, is a fourth generation drug. It will start going through the US FDA approval process starting this summer/fall. In the meantime, the company has actually has basically given an assurance to us that it will not close its special access compassionate program for individuals who have already been previously treated with other drugs and are running out of options, that they will leave that program open for the duration of the time that that they need to get the drug through in the U.S. and then eventually in other countries and eventually in Canada. So that's actually, I think, a very positive sign. The company has been a really great partner in many different ways, listening to the needs of patients, listening to many of us who have provided advice, solicited or not, to them. And they've been quite good at actually dealing with this. So we're actually quite happy with this. So that's a second update. The third update is there have been people asking about, there's some new trials of some novel agents that are coming through. And they're asking, are we able to get that into Canada? I can tell you that Duncan and I, for certain, have been pushing and pushing and pushing. But many of these companies have strategic plans, and because we often get lumped in with the US for geographic territory, if they have enough spots in the US to open, they rather not open in Canada because it goes through another administrative hurdle. If the company is small, they will have to um, farm it out to a third party to get it through the regulatory system in Canada to use it. So we've not been as successful in trying to get these drugs and these vaccines and compounds into Canada in the phase 1 setting. We are setting it up so that they know that we definitely punch way above our weight when it comes to recruitment and our very long track record, at least in Toronto at Princess Margaret, so that they're hopefully will come to us when they go into the phase 2 portion. So phase 1 is basically they're just trying to figure out um, is it safe and is what's the right dose to actually give patients. Phase 2 is when they actually seriously look to see is the drug going to be effective in patients. So we hope to at least get some of these trials open in Canada by then. The third thing that's really important is the fact that so far I've been the primary support for most of Canada, with the exception of around Edmonton and British Columbia, um, for access to neladalkib. The government and the company requires that it's somebody who actually has experience with the drug in order to supervise or co-supervise any other oncologists that need access to that medication to give to their patient. The good news is I'm no longer alone. Dr. Paul Whitley Price in Ottawa and his team are willing to help take over some of the new submissions in to access that drug. Right now, I have between ROS1 and ALK patients, approximately 3 dozen patients that I have to monitor remotely. They will be taking over and then taking the stress off me to some extent. And that will be very good. So, in other words, what we want is equity across Canada, whether you're from Halifax or Newfoundland, all the way through to Victoria, BC. If you need and qualify for this new drug, the fourth generation drug, neladalkib, we will do our best to make sure that I or Dr. Wheatley Price or either one of our teams will chaperone the local oncologist in order to get access to the drug. The drugs will come to our centers. The patients only have to pay for the courier to ship the medications to their homes at this point. And so we're hoping to keep this up to make sure there's full equity across Canada, that no one gets left behind
Mhm.
if you qualify for the drug. The definition of qualification for that drug is basically you have to have used up all the standard treatments in Canada. Remember, this drug has not been approved anywhere in the world. So Health Canada needs to be very careful. The last thing they want is a Globe and Mail expose about them releasing drugs willy-nilly when it hasn't been approved anywhere else in the world, no matter how good that drug appears to be. So the rule of thumb is patients need to have received um, usually lolotinib or third generation ALK inhibitor, which is lolotinib, and also chemotherapy. There are ways that we can circumvent some of these issues. Like, for instance, they don't specify how much chemo needs to be given. They don't specify whether you need to have progressed, your disease had to progress through it or not. There is nothing stopping patients from complaining that that one dose of chemo was enough to make them so sick that they can't tolerate it. So we found workarounds. So to allow patients to have it maybe at a bit earlier stage. The lolotinib is a big problem because they really won't, they really try very hard not to approve unless people have access to it. So occasionally we've had patients pay for like a week or two of it, and then nothing we can do if the patients claim that they're really sick from it and can't take it anymore. Sometimes, and maybe within ALK-positive Canada, some patients have stopped using a drug like lolotinib and have some left over. Um, that might save other people from having to pay, especially if that drug was gotten through private insurance or some other means. So that's something that maybe ALK-positive Canada can kind of figure out quietly as well. So there are workarounds that we can try to work through, but you need to know that the official word is you have to have at least lolotinib exposure, like have been on the drug, and has at least have received chemotherapy before a patient will be considered for this fourth generation drug. So I'm seeing nods from Duncan.
Mm.
Um, Anything else that I should comment on before we start with the questions? I guess I just want to make this as simple as possible for everybody.
I don't know if you want to say a word about TRI 611.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's one of the phase one compounds that Duncan and I tried to get here. We also tried to get a vaccine here as well, too, and basically got nowhere. The company at one point was contemplating maybe coming to Canada, and then they realized they needed to spend money in Asia and Europe because many places, like Canada, doesn't require Canadian participation eventually before they approve a drug. I almost wish they did, because places
Mhm.
like Taiwan and some of the European countries require participation in clinical trials by their patients in order for them to eventually get the drug approved. So automatically, those places get prioritized over a place like Canada. And because we're lumped with the US, every drug gets tested in the US because that's where the money making is in the US. So we're working on this, but no, we don't have that drug here. We're hoping to open up in phase two. I think we gave as much of a powerful discussion and as much persuasion as we can for them to open here as soon as they can.
Yeah.
So sorry. We're trying, but we're battling up. We're paddling up the. It's an uphill battle. I think I've mixed my analogies right now.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. All right. So I guess we'll start off with the questions that people
Okay,
might have, and
sure.
then if there are new questions after that, and especially if there anything based on things that I've said, it will come at the very end.
Okay, so Jeff, I will post the questions on the screen here. I'll share them.
Oh gosh, can someone read them? My vision is pretty awful. Hang
I'll
on.
read them.
Hang on. I've now made it significantly bigger than it was before, at least. Yeah, yeah.
I,
Except
I
I
will,
think.
Jeff. I'll read them for the audience there as well. So, the first question comes in and it says, I would like to know what other patients who are on the Lobrina at 100 milligrams do to manage the cognitive effects. I'm agitated. I have low attention, concentration, can't read more than 5 to 7 lines in a row. My writing has even changed as I have trouble with my fine gesture. I have mood change and unexpected reactions. This is hard for my family and I. What are the scientific consequences of reducing to a
Right.
75 milligram dose?
Okay. So the first question that comes to mind is is this person using lolotinib first line, or are they using it after they've been on another drug and have disease progressed on the other drug? So I'm going to take both of them because I don't want to have someone actually answer, that and claim to be that person. So if it is first line, like if it's the first pill that they're taking is lolotinib, dose reduce to 75 immediately. There's absolutely no reason why you should be on 100 milligrams. The 100 milligrams was chosen because initially the dose was chosen on the basis of the fact that it was supposed to be lolotinib was supposed to be used after crizotinib, brigatinib, alectinib, like all these other drugs, and therefore over time, patients or their disease, not the patients, but their disease has developed resistance to each one of these drugs. And these resistances usually are due to mutations. These additional mutations keep on piling up. And when you have lots of mutations, that's when you need the higher dose of lolotinib. The preclinical, in other words, the mouse data and the cell line data, and also our clinical data, strongly suggests that if you start it with lolotinib, you can have very effective coverage of brain and the rest of your body with down to 50 milligrams or even 25 milligrams. So definitely, if you are starting that drug, if it's a drug that you started off with, it's the first pill that you're taking, immediately, I would say stop the drug, hold on for maybe a few days to a week until the irritability and the memory and the mood symptoms gets better, and then restart at the 75 milligrams. Okay, so that's the first thing. If you're using the drug after you've had other drugs, then you need to be more careful. But from the way it's being described, if it's affecting your life that much, it makes sense to also decrease down to 75. It's just I caution people a little bit more because in that case, they might need a higher concentration and maybe a higher dose. Usually 75 is still good enough in patients, but I would be reluctant to go lower than 75. If, on the other hand, you're using the drug for the first time, I have patients who've been on 25 milligrams the last 5 years, and remarkably stable throughout this entire period. So that's would be the difference between the two. But it doesn't make sense to be stuck having so many symptoms and suffering at the 100 milligrams when I don't act when I think that in fact 100 milligrams may have been even a bit overkill, even if you use it in second and third line in this setting. And there's clear preclinical, like mouse data, cell line data, and data from the Crown trial, as well as another in the phase 2 trial, to suggest that the decrease in dose, especially to 75, will not make a difference.
Jeff, if I could add from personal experience, my first line was at 100 milligrams.
Mhm.
6 months had many of these symptoms and effects, and went down to 75. I've been on it for 11 months now, and a
Yeah.
big difference. So if I could add.
75 is very, very tolerable for the majority of patients. 100, I actually had thought was the dose that the company wanted to make as high as possible to make it the most effective, but it's quite toxic when it
Yeah.
comes to this. In fact, a lot of patients, not only do I start them at 75, but if their insurance company demands I start them at 100, I specifically ask them to get the 25 milligram pills. Because then it's much easier to actually then just ask them to drop one of the 4 pills that they take every day, rather than try to use up the 100 milligrams and try to figure out 2 days on, 1 day off, and do all of that until they run out of those pills. So yes, I think if you're having this many symptoms, you really need to, number one, not just reduce the dose. You should stop. Wait to make sure that the symptoms are improving before you decrease the dose. If you don't stop, even temporarily, like a few days to even a week to 2 weeks, and up to 3 or 4 weeks, if you've been suffering, the longer you've been suffering through these symptoms, the longer it takes for the symptoms to go away. So if you've been trying to deal with this for months, you might need 3 or 4 weeks in order to have it washed out, for the symptoms to improve, and then you start at the lower dose. All right. If you just drop the dose, oftentimes people will continue to suffer through these side effects. But if you just stop it for a short period of time, and there's no evidence that stopping it will suddenly cause a massive rebound growth for lolotinib, that will allow things to clear and allow you to restart at a lower dose, starting fresh. And that starting fresh is really important. So don't forget about that aspect of holding the drug and then starting at a lower dose instead of just dropping it to lower dose.
Okay, thank you. For the next question, comments, latest updates on treatments, new latest journal articles worth reading. Crown study is a good one. Any new ones? Comments there?
So yeah, I don't know whether you guys have it or not, but you guys maybe be able to post it before. I think maybe it was Katie or somebody who sent me the email with these questions, and I emailed back with a couple of articles. So if you can find that, the easiest thing to do is to put in the chat.
Okay, will do.
I just thought that was
Uh,
a faster and more efficient way of answering that question than to, than to spell out the actual article names and so forth.
I just dropped it in the chat for
Thank you.
everyone, Jeff.
Thank you. Okay, next. What do you do when you have run alectinib and lorlatinib's course? I'm told I don't qualify for anything, not even the clinical trials, unless I do chemotherapy.
Yes. So this is something that is also important to realize. Chemotherapy often will reset the clock in some cases. So in general, like if you've used one pill, one tyrosine kinase inhibitor pill, and then you move on to the next pill when it comes to this, right? In a way, if you think about this, right, you develop more and more resistance. And so if you then use the next drug, you're trying to that uphill battle to deal with resistances that develop over the other drugs. Chemo is an equal opportunity everything, right? It kills all different types of cancer cells, not just the ones that are sensitive to a particular drug, in this case. So in some cases, it might actually reset the clock, kill off the clones that are resistant as much or as easily as the ones that are sensitive, and then eventually will allow you to move on to the next drug. The obvious next drug after alectinib and lorlatinib is neladalkib. But I've been encouraging patients to actually at least try the chemo. It sounds horrible after, especially if you've been on these other pills for very long periods of time, to suddenly have to worry to come in and get blood work done all the time and come in. But amazingly, the chemotherapy is actually pretty well tolerated in the majority of patients. And I've had patients who've been on chemotherapy, after they've been on some of these other drugs for 2 or 3 years before they need to go on to something else. So it can help buy time. But my other concern is the fact that, remember, we have the alternative, which is to give a little bit of chemo, claim a problem, and then apply for the neladalkib, right, from Health Canada. But I do encourage people to actually try it for real because it may be that resetting the clock helps improve the chances of the next pill working. And once you decide to go one route, you can't really switch thereafter, right? So I know it doesn't sound great to have to think about chemotherapy, but if it gives you a long period of time, resets the clock, and improves the chances of the next pill working, it may be the best option in this case.
Very good. Okay, next. Are you aware of any reasons why more trials are not held in Canada? Who can contact a drug company for a compassionate discount, if that's even possible? Question mark.
Yeah. So there are a couple of regulatory problems with this. I've been going through this with a couple of patients, not with ALK, but with some other issues right now. A company has to have a reason to come into Canada, right? So we try to encourage them to come because we say we punch above our weight. You give us a slot and we'll give you, 4 or 5 times what you would get in terms of numbers of patients into your trials compared to each center in the US. We're more economical in some cases because obviously there's an exchange rate difference. So we make all of these arguments. But the uphill battle is the fact that it's a different country. So they need to go through a completely new regulatory process through Health Canada. Larger companies are more likely to go through it. Smaller companies and biotech companies, um, they don't have an experience. So they have to, as I said before, have to pay for another company to walk them through that process. So it's a big hurdle to actually deal with. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, I mentioned before, Health Canada and does not require any Canadian participation in any trials in order to eventually approve a drug. And so companies go to places where the countries do demand participation in trials and early access to the drugs. But our government hasn't required that. Now, there are obviously problems if you require it, because then you can never get certain drugs through if the company decides not to come to Canada anyway. So it's a two-edged sword. The third reason why there is an issue is the fact that we're more likely to get the drugs into Canada when they start going into phase 2 and phase 3 trials. Phase 1 trials are such that there are only, to be honest with you, in Canada, there are only 2, maybe 3 centers in Canada that specialize in phase 1. One of them is my center in Princess Margaret. Another one is in Edmonton, the Cross Cancer Institute in Edmonton. And sometimes there may be some trials that can get into Montreal as well, and that's it. So it makes it difficult when we only have a couple of places that can accommodate very early first in human trials in this setting, and combined with all of these other issues. Um, I think if I ask Duncan to talk, he can probably talk like 40 minutes on all the problems and issues that he's been going to, because he's been such a strong advocate. He sits on ALK positive, the U.S. Version of ALK positive, right? So he gets to hear all these companies pitch and so forth, and then we try to bring them into Canada, and we just have issues. So we're working on it. We're setting things up so that the moment they're willing to come to Canada, we're able to accommodate. But even then, it's going to be a limited number of sites in Canada. So if you live in some provinces or you live far away from some of the major cities, that's still going to be an issue.
Okay. Next question is with regards to pain medication. Why are ibuprofen and naproxen not recommended for alectinib patients?
Interestingly enough, I have lots of patients who are on both with alectinib and lolotinib. So I'm not sure where that comes from. That could be in some cases a general thing that when people are starting any type of chemo drug, right? And sometimes, instructions kind of mix everything up together, like all drugs that are for cancer are chemo drugs, whereas some are targeted and immunotherapy and so forth. The general recommendation for avoiding those medications is mostly because they do thin the blood out a little bit. They can cause occasionally a little bit of kidney damage and so forth. And so there might be a recommendation to take acetaminophen instead of that. But I do have a lot of patients who actually are on those medications, and I don't see a problem with it at all. So I'm not sure where that comes from, and I would maybe question that a little bit more carefully with one's oncologist, just to make sure that there is a specific reason and not just a general motherhood statement that everybody gets with their instructions.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I've been through alectinib 9 months and now lorlatinib for about the same. I've been told there's nothing next in line for me except for maybe second phase Nuvalent. The representative putting on the second phase Nuvalent trial in Vancouver has rejected me until I go through chemotherapy. Is there any other workaround for this?
I think I've just explained that particular issue, and in fact, I think if you've been through, so the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So if you've only gotten 9 months out of alectinib and then 9 months of lolotinib, it may be that your disease is not so much ALK dependent anymore. So in other words, the ALK may not be driving your cancer. So a couple of things that could happen. One is to consider getting another biopsy, whether it's an actual biopsy or it's a liquid biopsy, which is a blood test, seeing if you can get. I'm not sure if Vancouver will cover it, but sometimes they'll cover it, and getting it retested for with the molecular testing. Um, some places they're willing to, and some oncologists are willing to figure out how to squeak that through. Others are very pedantic and will say no, in which case you may have to pay for it. It might be a couple of $1,000s to actually pay for it. And the only reason to do that is to figure out if something else is driving your cancer at this point. Um, and then usually if it's something else that's driving, it's a small percentage in which we have another targetable drug that we can use to target that other thing. Most of the time, we find out that, oh goodness, it's PIK3CA or MAPP kinase, all these other genes or pathways, and we don't have a drug. So then we usually go to chemotherapy. So again, these are all the particular reasons why I think it does make sense to at least try the chemotherapy. I know it sounds awful to have to go on chemotherapy, but the reality is that most of our patients, because they're not usually extreme heavy smokers with really bad heart disease and lung disease and are 85 years old, they can really tolerate the chemotherapy reasonably well. So I guess I'm asking um, our patients to not just rule it out just because it sounds terrible. I do have patients who've been on it and they're working full time and they're actually doing quite well. And they come once every 3 or 4 weeks for a couple of hours, and then they go back to their lives. And again, that might reset the clock as well, making it more likely for the Nuvalent drug to work in the future.
Okay. Uh, Effective side effect management for neuropathy, cholesterol, RX interactions with lorlatinib, targeted radiation. Is it a reasonable standard of care for pain management?
Okay, so there's a whole lot to unpack there, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, so what was the pain medication side of this? Where did that come in? Because just about all pain medication is compatible with alectinib and lorlatinib. I mean, I even mentioned, the ibuprofen and naproxen, right? But narcotics can, acetaminophen can. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but where is that question? In
7.
here. Number 7.
Yes.
Okay, yes. But the issue is that neuropathy is often managed with other types of drug, with gabapentin, pregabalin, usually might require, the oncologist to think about how they would manage neuropathy differently. All of those drugs are completely safe to use, and don't interact with alectinib, lorlatinib, or any of these drugs right now. So, if the question is it a reasonable standard of care for pain management? Yes, but I don't know what you're using or what you're getting. I'm hoping it's drug specific for neuropathy rather than general pain medication. All right. And so those are drugs such as gabapentin and so forth that actually specifically impact on neuropathic type pain. The cholesterol is something that used to scare us a lot, but now it's pretty straightforward. We usually use drugs such as rosuvastatin. We try to avoid drugs such as atorvastatin because atorvastatin has an interaction with lorlatinib, for instance, whereas rosuvastatin does not when it comes to how the drug is gotten rid of in the body. So usually it's rosuvastatin, and then if after a slight increase in dose, it's still not working by itself, ezetimibe is a 10 milligram single tablet that's quite effective in this particular setting. So that was something I learned in the last year, was I used to just put people on the statin and just keep on increasing and increasing, increasing to the maximum. And I found out that a little bit of ezetimibe, it's a single dose type of thing, along with a lower dose of statin. It's often good enough, and you don't have to go to the higher doses. Um, Targeted radiation. Yes, I use targeted radiation under several circumstances. Number one, sometimes patients will have oligoprogressive disease. It's a fancy term for meaning that most of the disease is under control, except maybe a couple of spots, up to 4 or 5 in some cases, starts to escape from the drug that they're on. And in that case, sometimes zapping those spots with radiation is enough to put everything back into control and wait it out. Now, obviously, if it happens a few times, then maybe it's time to think about switching the drug treatment. But sometimes that's enough to keep someone going for another year or another 18 months or even 9 months before something else pops up and then you can decide whether to re-zap it again. I The analogy I use is you're playing whack-a-mole, right? That carnival game, right? When a tumor pops up somewhere, you kind of whack it down and then you wait until the next time it pops up. In that particular case. So I use targeted radiation that side. I use it in another side as well. For some patients, I've been very, very stable on drugs like alectinib and alotinib for long periods of time. Sometimes I find an excuse to do a PET scan. It's not easy because the government really tracks these, and they don't want to do a PET scan if you have metastatic disease. But sometimes I will try to get one and see what disease is still active. And if that disease is still active and it's a couple of spots, and it's been a couple of years that the patient has been on these drugs or 18 months or something like that, I will ask my radiation colleagues to see if they're willing to zap those few spots to try to basically keep that drug going for as long as possible. So those are a couple of ways that I would use targeted radiation in this setting.
Okay. Next, what's the status of the vaccine for ALK? I know you've mentioned a little bit vaccines before.
It's
What stage
primarily
was that?
used for earlier stage at this point, right? Because the purpose of vaccine is to prevent the cancer from coming back. It's much harder to use a vaccine after the cancer is already fully established back at this point. So it's generally used for earlier stage, and it's at this point still in phase one and phase 1B development right now. So we're not
Okay.
quite there yet. Again, when it gets to phase two, Duncan and I will go back and try to, talk to the companies again and see what we can do.
Mm. Okay, next question. Why would there be some progression in areas if you're on alectinib? How would you determine if chemo is appropriate?
I kind of answered that. So I'm just going to clarify that just slightly in saying that if it's a small number of spots, you might argue that, those are the ones that escaped and most of the disease is under control. How many of those spots count as a little and how much counts as a lot depends on who you ask. The traditionalists would say up to 2 spots, maybe 3 spots. They would consider and say that, look, you know, these tumors have figured out how to escape, but only those little patches. The rest of the disease is still under control. And if you can zap those spots, maybe you can keep them on the alectinib or the lorlatinib longer term. More aggressive places, and it depends on which part of the country, might accept anywhere up to 5 spots. And there are places. So our center is now modeling against what's happening in the U.S. and occasionally are doing up to 10 to 15 spots, but we're on the outlier part of the schema across Canada.
Okay.
Um, okay, I hope I answered that. All right.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
What is the next question is what is the accessibility to medication at early stages like stage 3, and what are the options for a combination of treatments?
Right. So number one, it should be accessible across Canada if it is early enough stage that the only thing that the patient has had is a resection. So if they had surgery and it's fully cut out, then the Alina trial, which has gone through the process of approval and so forth, um, 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 you know, could be considered for use in this case. And it's 2 years of alectinib in this case.
Mm. Okay.
Stage three is tough because stage three usually requires not just surgery, but usually requires a whole bunch of other things, like chemoradiation, for instance, or chemotherapy followed by surgery in this particular case. So if that is what's happening, they don't qualify for the official, results of the trial, and therefore they're not included. Again, there is occasionally, so there is a way sometimes to get people on the alectinib, in this particular case, or the lorlatinib, but there's a trade-off. The oncologist has to claim that something on the CT scan looks like the cancer is back, and claim that the patient is stage 4 in this case, and then they get access to it, right? If it's metastatic, you get access to it. Here is the trade-off, right? Um, if the decision is to go on alectinib at this point, again, if at some point the disease comes back despite being on alectinib, and then, the alectinib is supposed to be only for a few years, but you're calling it stage 4. So you're treating it for, I don't know how long, perhaps forever, right? Is that right? Is that wrong? It's really hard to tell. But if you run into problems, switching to lolotinib at that point becomes really difficult because you've used up the one line of therapy that's officially approved in Canada, right? We don't have second line lolotinib use. If you start off with lolotinib, okay, maybe you can use that long term, but remember it also has more side effects than alectinib. And there's no absolute proof that it's a benefit. So unfortunately, stage 3 is that difficult zone where there has to be a lot of discussion as to how to navigate this, both in terms of what's the best thing to do medically, but also strategically to make sure you don't lose access to important drugs and in like alectinib and lolotinib down the line, if a decision is made to kind of, trick the system to use it a bit earlier. Did I
Okay.
answer that? I think I did.
Yes,
Okay.
of course. Next question talks or asks about availability of neladalkib. Now, I think you may have addressed this, but maybe just
Yes. So as
elaborate.
I said, officially, it has to. So if you're in a position where your oncologist doesn't know that they can get neladalkib through me, they should send me an email. Simple as that. And I think you guys can send them and can give everybody my email when it comes to this. And then I will work with them to figure out what will it take to get access to neladalkib or whether it's even appropriate. As I mentioned, sometimes chemo makes more sense in this case. So that's probably the easiest way to do this because otherwise there's like too many exceptions and backdoor methods and so forth to deal with this. If there is concern and things are not working out with the current treatments, have them email me. I'm happy to actually work with them and with whoever you are to figure out the best plan.
Okay, excellent. Uh, Next question: what can we do to avoid or at least minimize weight gain associated with lorlatinib?
Oh,
It's
that's a great
very hard
question.
to deal with the fact that I'm always hungry.
This is yeah. You are describing probably the biggest side effect that's difficult to deal with olatinib. You would think it might be, the memory issues and the so forth. Dose reduction usually takes care of that. You would think that it might be the hypercholesterolemia, that the high cholesterols. Lots of these drugs are very able to deal with that. Even the neuropathy that you get, or even the swelling of the legs, what's called edema, are things that we have ways to manage. Weight gain is probably the most difficult to deal with. There are two types of weight gain. Weight gain type number one is a type that can be managed if you jump on it really quickly. So what happens is that if a patient starts on lolotinib or alectinib, this happens with alectinib too, maybe to a lesser extent, but it can happen. The moment they start gaining weight, maybe 1 or 2 kilograms above their healthy weight, like before they got sick, because some people lose a lot of weight right, when they get sick. Once they go above their standard weight when they were healthy, it's time to jump in. That means calorie counts. That means, eating, talking to a dietitian. That means exercise, planning. That also means, in some cases, watching YouTube videos, because in many places in Canada, when you talk to a dietitian that works with cancer patients, their primary focus is, oh my God, you're losing weight. We need to stop that from happening. So once they're told the issue is you're gaining weight, they kind of go, oh, I don't know what to do. And so the things to deal with might be in some cases jumping in very early, and at the same time, in some cases eating empty calorie foods, right? Like, one patient told me that they eat a lot of popcorn because it just expands in the stomach and makes them at least feel mildly full without, without that. So I guess low calorie type foods that are bulky, for instance, might be helpful. And so that group you can kind of control through that mechanism. The second group, and that's particularly in what I would say it happens more in younger females who are smaller in stature. Um, their homeostasis, which means, all of us have in our brains a set weight that we consider normal-ish, right? And genetically, some people's weight are set much higher. That's why they're obese. We don't blame people for being obese. We know a lot of it is genetics. What happens is that this drug actually resets that homeostasis point, that the balance point of weight to much higher. And those patients, they could be eating 800 calories a day and they're still gaining weight. They could be like doing CrossFit and they're still gaining weight. It's extremely difficult to deal with. Sometimes in that case, I usually will send to in larger cities, they're what we call metabolic clinics. They deal with high cholesterol, they deal with weight gain, obesity, and so forth, right? And sometimes they can help. And some of these individuals might need to go on to GLP agonists, GLP-1 agonists, which are like Wegovy or Ozempic and so forth. It's not something that we talk about a lot. There's more work being done in the US when it comes to this. The little data we have suggests that it's mostly safe, as far as we know, short-term wise, between taking lolotinib and these drugs. The problem in Canada is, how do you access these drugs, right? How expensive is it going to be? Is it going to be covered by private insurance? Those are all some of the issues. But there are two types. And until you can figure out which one you are, you're hoping that you're the former, whether you can still manage things, but you need to jump on it very early. And figure out, you're not full, you're always, that hunger pain is there, but you're watching your calories, you're doing everything you're supposed to. You're learning to eat just bulky, low calorie foods as much as possible, versus the other one in which there's absolutely nothing that we can do if that weight balance is now set at a much higher goal. I wish I had
Okay.
something, better to say, but we're all working on trying to figure out how to better deal with the weight gain, which I think is a really big problem for some patients.
Okay, a few more questions. Managing the side effects and treatment of lung affected by pleural effusion.
Okay. Pleural effusions are sometimes very difficult to actually manage. It's going to be hard for me to answer that question in a very general sense. Um, some patients will need to actually have it drained on a regular basis and might need to actually have a tube placed in to deal with it. And then you have to manage all the issues, right? Taking showers with this tube sticking out of you, the potential for infection. If it wiggles a bit, it starts to bleed. Things like that are all potential issues. There are some cases in which they're able to sclerose, in other words, pump in an irritant that causes that whole area to scar up. Again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. I really find it difficult to answer that question more specifically than that right now, because there's so many things that can happen. Again, if somebody has a specific question, can they email me in that case? Because I need to know more specifics. And I may or may not be able to answer it, but at least I may be able to send them in the right direction to get help locally.
Okay, thank you. Um, is there anything a patient recently that started on lorlatinib can do to maximize their chances of staying on the medication long term?
I think I basically have said what needs to be said, right? um, um, Early monitoring, early intervention for a lot of these side effects, whether it's high cholesterol to weight gain, to swelling of the legs, to mood swings, to all of that. Managing those well allows you to stay on the drug long term. Accepting the fact that it's okay to go to a lower dose if necessary also is very important for quality of life. And I think that all of these techniques are going to be important. One of the things that it was in the chat includes a lay person's view of how to manage side effects. I encourage you to read that, because a lot of the things that are discussed may not be, so intuitive. The fact that it's okay to stop the drug and then restart at a lower dose. A lot of these things are foreign to people. They're kind of like, I can't stop the drug. I can't stop the drug when it comes to this. But in fact, doing those things sometimes allow you to stay on the drug long term.
Okay. What's next if alectinib stops working? Has combo treatment been used? What's the most common side effect after years of ALK plus TKIs, particularly alectinib and lorlatinib?
Okay, that's another loaded multi-pronged question. Um, After alectinib stops working, if you can get your hands on lorlatinib, that would make a lot of sense in this case. How you get your hands on is a different issue because obviously right now we're all working hard to try to get coverage of that drug after alectinib. And right now there's a bit of an issue. I don't want to say too much again. If you're running into a problem with that, and you think the next thing is lorlatinib, and you're having trouble figuring out how to get access, or your oncologist is having trouble getting access to it, email me before they start sending applications for exceptions and try to apply for a lot of things. We have some backdoor methods, but only if we do it early. Um, has combo treatment been used? You mean a combination of alectinib and lorlatinib, or maybe brigatinib and alectinib? There have been discussions about perhaps trying some of these techniques, with the idea is that the two drugs are enough to control the cancer, but you get, a lot fewer side effects because you're using maybe half the dose of each one. We pitched this to Takeda, so that we still have access to brigatinib. They ultimately declined to actually support that trial. So we don't have data on it, but it's something that we do think about. If we give um, enough of two different drugs with two different types of side effects, then you might get much fewer side effects, but you might still get the benefit of those two drugs working together. The most common side effects after years of ALK-positive TKIs. So for alectinib, it tends to be fatigue. Fatigue tends to be insidious and kind of hit people slowly. So a lot of times they don't even realize it's related to alectinib. And only when they stop it for a few weeks or a month or so, they go, "Oh, wait, like, I'm feeling much better." Because that's really hard to tell because it doesn't happen early. Alectinib side effects, as I said before, are slow and insidious. The weight gain and the swelling of the legs are also things that can happen on a longer term basis. Lorlatinib side effects, on the other hand, are almost always early, within the first 3 or 4 months. If you get through the hump, it's highly unlikely, and the Crown data for the 7 years will update that as well to confirm the fact that if we can manage your side effects in the first year to 2 years, people sail through with no new side effects from that point onwards, or very, very few side effects, and they're quite mild at that point. So, slight difference between the two drugs. Okay, and I think we now are on the very last question.
Two left.
Oh, two left, sorry.
Other than targeted therapy, is there any advanced therapy to cure the disease? Are there any clinical trials going on, and how can one enroll for clinical studies?
Kind of answered that to some extent, right?
Yeah.
That the issue is that I take issue with the word cure the disease.
Mm.
We don't think about curing high blood pressure. We don't think about curing diabetes in patients. I really encourage people to think about, ALK-positive disease as a chronic disease. You live with it, but you might live with it for a very, very long time in this case. But you need to always receive some sort of treatment. I mean, people don't just stop their blood pressure medication out of the blue in this case. So that's the only thing that I would say about that comment. Everything else, I think I've answered.
Okay. Uh, Finally, I understand that a study has come out confirming that alectinib indeed can cause weight gain. I think you've addressed this a bit. I've been on alectinib for 2.5 years, and despite eating less and healthier, have gained 20 pounds over 2 years and have plateaued. Is this acceptable? If not, what can I do about it?
To be honest with you, 10, 20 pounds is about like 10 kilograms in here. You're doing well. I had, there's some of my lectinib patients from before that would literally gain 30 kilograms in the span of a short period of time. So alectinib doesn't cause weight gain as often as lorlatinib, but it can, as I said, and it's often insidious, right? It doesn't hit immediately. It's not as rapid as lorlatinib, but over the course of many months, you start to see it happening. Again, it is easier to try to control it. And once you know about this, it's probably easier to deal with. And I think you're doing well if you're able to handle the 10-kilogram gain as long as you're not gaining any more.
Jeff, one quick question came through the chat. Are there any vitamins that you would recommend?
Yeah, I'm a classical Western oncologist in here. I think if you take, multivitamins, at the doses that they are telling you to take, it couldn't hurt, but I don't recommend anything specifically to help the cancer. My own viewpoint is this: vitamins are very useful to keep you healthy, to keep the cancer and other diseases from coming. But the horse is out of the barn by the time the cancer is here. If it was that easy to manage cancer by taking vitamins, I mean, I'd be so thrilled to be out of a job tomorrow. So I don't have anything specific, but I certainly think that, a regular multivitamin or kind of, the usual vitamins at regular doses are perfectly safe, perfectly fine, and, may help to keep you generally healthy.
Okay. We've hit the hour mark. There is one more question
Hmm.
in the chat. Jeff, can you
Ah,
see it there?
yes,
Uh,
yes, yes, yes. So
okay.
atorvastatin is metabolized in the liver. So in other words, it is gotten rid of or inactivated in the liver by the same enzymes that inactivate lorlatinib. So the concern is that, if is that this will trigger a problem with metabolizing both of these drugs. And interesting enough, some of these drugs induce these enzymes to work even more efficiently. So there is a concern that if you use the two drugs together, that you may either increase or decrease the efficacy of lorlatinib in this particular case. So the recommendation, and this has been a recommendation from day one from the company, is if you're on atorvastatin, just switch to rosuvastatin or pravastatin. Both of these do not have the same, are not metabolized in the liver in the same way by the same enzyme as the lorlatinib. And that's been a continuous recommendation from day one. So if you're on atorvastatin and you're on lorlatinib, please talk to your doctor and ask them to double check. If it may be better just to switch you to rosuvastatin, which is the current Canadian recommendation, is pravastatin or rosuvastatin, but not atorvastatin.
Okay, there is one more question in the chat, and this may be our
Okay.
last. Just above the question that you read
You
there.
know what? I can't see it, so do you mind reading it now? I've
Yep.
somehow
Does
lost
a
my chat.
Yep. Does a history of second cancer other than ALK positive exclude a patient from accessing nalactinib via the exceptional access program?
No, because it's not a clinical trial. Clinical trials would demand that the other cancer be inactive for at least a few years. Um, but in this case, it is a special access program specifically designed for when supposedly patients have run out of other choices, right? So yes, that's not an issue at all. Not an issue at all.
Okay. Um,
Jeff, can I just ask you to address the second part of one of the questions there, which is the use of tumor markers?
Oh, okay. Is there a tumor marker question in there? I didn't see it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
just below.
one in two. It's a question in two
Okay.
parts.
Yeah. Yes. Most of us are not very good at using tumor markers, in part because for many years they weren't covered by the government and we didn't want patients to have to pay for it. If you have colon cancer, it's covered. For a while, prostate cancer, it was covered. Ovarian cancer, it's covered. Pancreatic cancer is covered. But in lung cancer, it wasn't covered in many jurisdictions. That is starting to change right now as the costs of those tumor biomarkers have decreased. I'm hoping the question is like blood-based on tumor markers in this case. And that's the one that I will be describing, like CEA, for instance. Um, I probably could be using more of it. I don't, because traditionally it hadn't been covered. There are places like London, Ontario that use the biomarkers, use the tumor markers to actually monitor the course of the disease. And they actually do a really good job of doing that and helps monitor for early disease progression and things like that. Most of us don't use it for these variety of reasons. I generally use scans in this case. I might change my mind a bit later. If the question about biomarkers was instead molecular biomarkers, all right, instead of protein biomarkers, which is what I was talking about before, then that's different. Usually they're expensive. Sometimes they're not covered by the government a second and third time, and you would use it only if you thought that it would make a difference, and only at the time that the disease was progressing at that time, and you need to make a decision as to what to use next. Sometimes that can be very useful to guide, but again, you would need to talk to your oncologist to figure out whether that'll help or not. I answered the question in two different ways because I didn't know which type of biomarker was being discussed.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
Was there another question or was that a comment? It just popped in and then popped out.
oh, yes, one more question. I've been on lorlatinib 100 since August of last year. I've since gone to 75 milligrams. My hands every morning are unable to close until I work with them. Has anyone else had symptoms like this? What about testosterone levels as well?
I mean, I think when you have active cancer at some point, it can affect hormones across the board. That could be a more general question. I don't usually check testosterone on my patients, but I can see that it can have a bearing just from having active disease and cancer. Um, that these type of inability to close their hands and so forth, these types of things occur in a small proportion of patients, but they do occur. I've seen it, and it's real. I usually send my patients off to a rheumatologist, and sometimes they will try things such as low dose prednisone, like low dose steroids. They will try different methods to try to handle that as a side effect. If that still doesn't work, then yeah, there may be consideration for decreasing the dose. But again, if that were to happen, I would suggest that one stop the drug. Make sure that after a few weeks, the symptoms are actually better. Because what if they're not related? In this case, as people get older, they can also get stiff joints and things as well. So make sure that you test it out to make sure it's related before you drop the dose in this case. But I have seen it, and I have tested it out by having the patient stop the drug for a few weeks, or sometimes up to a month, and then they tell me, "Oh my God, it's so much better now." Then I realize it is related, right? Because sometimes you do all of that, and there's no change at all, and you realize it's just unrelated in that case, in which case you would work with a rheumatologist to deal with this. I would probably get the rheumatologist involved even right now, if it's bothering you this much, to see what options you have before doing some of the other things with the drug that you're on.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. So, Jeffrey, thank you. I'm just going to remind everyone that if you have feedback about today's session, obviously we want to hear about it. Look for an email in the next week or so with the recording and a survey. And you could always stay connected with us through social media sites such as Instagram, Facebook, and the private Facebook group, also LinkedIn. And if you'd like to continue the conversation from today, a private group is a great way. And I'll just say personally, I didn't know any ALK patients at all till I got connected with the group, and the group is great. So I will leave it at that. Duncan.
Yeah, if I could just ask everybody to take a look at our website, ALK-positivecanada.org, and please sign up for the newsletter, which is sent out every quarter. And if you have any questions other than those for Jeff, please send them through to info@alkpositivecanada.org, and with pleasure we'll answer those to the best of our ability. I want to thank Jeff for coming along tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you
Basil
so much for having me.
We're there for the technical part, so thank you both, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, right. Take care, everybody.
Basil,
Thanks.
thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.